Good morning. You've come to the right Sunday. Those of you who are joining us online, too bad you won't get to eat. Um, yeah, it's. I'm looking forward. I was looking forward to today and to what it also represents. I mean, who are we? A relatively small group of people in one corner of the world. Um, what threw us together? Who knows? It's like the show The Office. What do these people have in common? How do they end up together? And it's a strange mystery, the way in which the web of our lives sort of intersects. And today is really just a celebration of that. There's this thing called C3 that is, believe it or not, it's in your yellow sheet. Don't read it now. You're supposed to be listening to me. Is 150 years old. And it's changed. And that's not really even a surprise. Why? Because that's the fundamental law of evolution. All things change. Or as the Buddhists put it, everything is impermanent. And so here we are, 150 years later, none of us, as far as I know, unless someone's lying about their age, were here at the beginning. And I don't think anyone at the beginning could see the community center here and this collection of people um, gathering around these particular values. Although, if I had to guess, if there was a way to have a conversation with the founders of this place, I bet there are threads of connection interwoven in even in all of our stated values, all six of them, that those original founders held. Maybe they would express differently, but I bet there are threads of connection. Why? Because there are always threads of connection. And it's important. I think one of the interesting things about the last 6 months is I've tried to have sort of an ancient present or ancient future kind of conversation in talking about our values. That's why I called it ancient virtue. What did I call it? Ancient virtues, modern values. Just because that conversation I think is important, especially in our sort of ever present sort of tweeting CNN ticker culture. Immediacy is the only thing that matters. I beg to differ. So it's important to have a conversation with the past, but not to worship the past. And so here we are, some sort of new iteration. And what I want to do today is, first of all, I can't speak very long. Even the board was like, can't do it. Got to keep it short. So um, that's because we want to celebrate together. And what I want to do is ask a couple questions, and I want to read all of our values again. And I might make a few little comments here or there like I do when I read poems, but I just want us to hear them. And hear them like a poem, like you might hear a poem. And you might find yourself asking certain questions like, do I really hold these values? Or you might find yourself asking a question like, do I live into these values? Do I fail to live into them at times? Do I promote them? Am I an ambassador for these things? Or do I like just saying I have values? Am I an ambassador for these things? But before I read them, I thought of sort of three things I've been thinking about in the sort of weeks leading up to today, because I'm going to end our conversation about values that's been going on for 6 months. If you've been paying attention, every month we've done a different value, and I've tried to approach it my way, and our guests have tried to approach it in their unique way, and even our musicians have spoken into them in a much more subtle and probably more important way than even the speakers. So here we are. We're ending that conversation, and we'll pick up on a new series coming up in the next couple of months. But here are things I've been thinking about. Here are some of my questions. Why do we need them? Why do we need values? And more than that, why do we need shared values? I mean, that's just like a genuine question. Why do we need such a thing? What function does it serve? I'm not going to answer these, by the way. Why do we need them? And why do we need to put them in front of our eyes from time to time? Part of the answer to that I hope will be just in once we read them. Oh, here they are in front of me again. All right. Here are some other questions. Why does C3 exist right now in its present iteration? Why not just like call it a day? We have some savings. We could just split it up, and just go to Blimpie, and have a sub. Why? I don't know why I thought of Blimpie. Why? Why does it exist? What function does it serve? Why do we get together? Why do we drink coffee and have these, tasty treats? Again, I'm not answering them, but why? And what might it look like in the coming weeks, months, and years? Why is it needed now in the 21st century? That's a much bigger question. Why would we need to talk about values as a community and have a certain kind of spiritual community right now in the 21st century? Because if the answer is, well, we don't really need to, then what are we doing here? Besides, we like people in the room, and some people we don't like all that much, like all communities. Why are you putting yourselves through this? So I think we have to think about these questions as we sort of step forward, because we do live in very unstable and uncertain times. And I want to say something about that after I read the values. But there's something unique. And maybe every generation feels like, I didn't live through the 60s, but the way people talk about it is like, oh my gosh, the world is on fire, our culture is on fire, something is... And we're sort of at another place like that. And I might even exaggerate and say maybe there are 500-year cycles, which I got from, what's her name? Phyllis Tickle. I don't know if you've ever read any of her books. She likes to talk about these 500-year cycles, and she says we're kind of in another reformation of sorts. Everything is being called into question. The rug is being pulled out. So I want to say a few more things. One of the things that I've learned just in looking at these values, again, sort of directly in the way that I look at them, is that they're more challenging than I thought. They're more challenging than I thought. And actually, in some ways, they're more challenging than belief statements. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment, evangelical environment, and we were all about beliefs. And I'm not saying beliefs have no place, but they don't really tell you all that much. You can say you believe something. It doesn't even matter if it's true. You're like, well, I believe that. Saying you value something, the only way you value something is if you do something with it, really. A belief, you don't really have to do anything. I mentally believe something. There's not much, it doesn't really ask very much. And just looking at the values, like one of them, we respect the dignity and worth of every individual. You can't say I believe that. Who cares if you believe it? So anyway, I found them to be more challenging. And part of the answer to the question is why would we get together and put these in front of us from time to time? Because they're challenging. They're aspirational as much as they are a challenge, as much as they are a belief. They're aspirational. They can be and should be lived into, at least in my view. The other thing that I've sort of found over the last few months in just wrestling with these is that I tried to look backwards, as I said a few minutes ago, with Aristotle and all the other junk I read. Not to call Aristotle junk, you know what I mean. Stuff that's filtering through my own interests in library and research and so forth. But I think that human beings do not grow up well, or easily, we should say. Now, we grow up, we get older. Like, getting old is easy. How do you do it? You just don't do anything. You're getting older. But growing up, psychologically, spiritually, fill in the blank is a little more challenging. And actually, all ancient cultures knew that. That's why they had rites of passage and ordeals, and um, we don't need to get into all that stuff. But growing up is hard. And I actually think right now in the 21st century, it's very hard to grow up. And it's hard for young people, it's hard for old people, it's hard for all of us to grow up. And we live sort of with an illusion that everything right now that's brand new is where it's at. You know, like just go in the grocery store, all the little labels say new. As if food is a new thing, you know, like, oh, new? But we live with that kind of like paper mache mask of a culture where everything, you know, like I said, new is where it's at. But there's something about wisdom that doesn't work like that. And so just in wrestling with these values, where did they come from? How have human cultures and religions and spiritualities and philosophies tried to help people grow up? And believe it or not, there are lessons and insights and stories that have to be preserved and passed on and talked about. It shines a light on who we think we are. So I'm finding that to be a particular challenge as I think about moving forward. Maybe the question is something like, what is my relationship with tradition and what is my relationship with innovation? I think, like all paradoxes, both matter. I wish I could be all about innovation, but the only way innovation works is if it's in conversation with what's gone before. Otherwise, there's no such thing. Have I made sense? So what is my relationship with tradition? Even from a country point of view, what are things in our tradition that have helped us grow up? And what are the things that haven't? You have to have a conversation about these things, especially if you're going to think about creative ways of moving forward. And here's the third sort of thing I've been thinking about the past week. What kind of world is emerging right now? What kind of world is emerging? What kind of world is being co-created? I particularly like that word because it means we're participants in whatever it is that's emerging. What kind of world is being co-created? And I'd like to say one kind of thing about that for a second. 500 years ago, just think about that. 500 years ago, there was not even a concept in people's minds of the globe, of global culture, of civilizations. There were civilizations that had never heard of one another. Right now, with a credit card, you can fly to Russia or the Orient or Australia. Well, I was going to say in a day you could be there. Longer, I suppose, if you want to go to Australia. But that is such a fundamental shift in human consciousness that we haven't even caught up to it. That there is such a thing as the globe, as the planet, as global civilizations. And what was my point with going on about that? My point was, what kind of world is emerging? And what's emerging is complex. One of the principles of evolution, as you know, is that things move from simple to complex. We don't know why, you know? But it's true. Things move from simple to complex. And apply that symbolically to cultures and civilizations, and things move from simple to complex. One of the things that's happening and that makes it scary is that we cannot go back. You can't go back. You can't go back to hunter-gathering. You can't go back to agrarian fantasies. You can't go back. You can't go back to a world where things were relatively clean. And I knew my group, and I knew the other group, and you cannot go back. And that is scary for everybody, regardless of political position, if you're really honest about that. Global civilization is hard to get your mind around. You think you know how the economy works? Nobody in this room really knows how it works. It has to do with the freaking weather, among other 1 billion factors. The world is complex. And what kind of world is emerging? And the question that comes along with that is, what kind of world are we co-creating? And I think one of the interesting things about our values is that when you begin to look at them individually and ask questions about how I might live into these, it is a way of trying to answer the question, what kind of world am I co-creating? And it does matter. Remember I said a few weeks ago, I like to quote Abraham Heschel, a Jewish philosopher and poet and rabbi. He says, words create worlds. The context for that, by the way, he said, the Holocaust started with pamphlets. Think about that. So words create worlds. And let's maybe just extend that a little bit to say our values create worlds. Because it's not just words. It's words plus. Agreed? And your values and the ones that you hold and aspire to and live into do co-create the world, even if you think you're relatively insignificant, which you are. It's just part of the, as the world becomes more complex, I think we have a greater opportunity to be more humble. Humility, I think, comes from the word humus. Just popped into my head. I'd have to look it up, but I think I'm right. Don't look on your phones right now. Earth. That's what humility is. Earthiness. And we need more earthiness. Would you not agree? We need more groundedness, meaning a more humble way of being in the world. So what kind of world are you co-creating? And I think even the tiniest of actions matter. And I'd like to say something about politics. Because, everybody's chill about politics right now. And I'd like to ask you a question. And here, the question is something like this. Why come to C3 and listen to little talks and some music and get together with people and talk about values when you could be on Facebook retweeting things or reposting things and organizing and getting riled up? And why come here? What is the relationship between this place and the political landscape? Or let's call it the mainstream landscape. What kind of place do you want this to be? Sort of my question. And the reason why I'm asking that, I'm not going to answer it now, but I want us to think about it over the next few months. My guess, I mean, call me crazy, but my guess is that over the next few months, our culture is going to become more contentious. Okay? I know. Crazy thought. So ask yourself the question, what kind of world am I co-creating? What kind of world am I co-creating as the next few months unfold? My hope is that in some way, our values can humble us in how we begin to talk about what's going on in our country or continue to talk about what's going on in the world. One of the things that I think is scary for all of us is that America's not all that important. 4 years is not all that important. It is, and it isn't. In the global sense of things, in our ecosystems and the biosphere, and it's a sliver of all of the things that we can be concerned about and involved in. So again, what kind of world am I co-creating? How can even our own values begin to shape how we'd like to co-create the next few months? I think it matters. And it matters even in the most crass ways at the voting booth, right? We now know if you were, now maybe you're, I don't know how many of you are in Generation X. That's me. Yeah, all right, Dave Dean. All right, Generation X. We generally say, none of this matters. Voting is a waste of freaking time, whatever. I beg to differ at this point in my life. So we know it matters. We know the political landscape matters. We know even the smallest um, structures of leadership in our culture, in our cities, in our towns, in our states, it matters. And it also matters what relationship um, these places have with corporate culture. Because, like it or not, it's the founding of America is as corporate as it is political. So there are a lot of powers out there. Anyway, I'm getting totally sidetracked. What was my main point? What kind of world are you co creating? What kind of conversations do you want to be having? How might our values help shape the kind of world we'd like to see in the next 6 months or 6 years? That kind of thing. Here are our values. Try to hear them. We respect the dignity and worth of every individual. We respect the dignity and worth of every individual. What faces come to mind? We respect the dignity and worth of every individual. We might even need to expand this to non-human individuals and beings. We respect the dignity and worth of every individual. Done. Did it. Easy. We affirm all people and embrace all genders, sexual orientations, and ethnicities. Even ethnicity is becoming complicated. Like if you ask Obama, what are you? Do you know he has a couple of options on that checklist that the government gives you? Isn't that interesting? What kind of world is this? Not one even the founders of this place 150 years ago could imagine, much less the world 500 years ago, much less the world 2,000 years ago. We affirm all people and embrace all genders, sexual orientations, and ethnicities. Sounds like a challenge. We pursue the free exchange of ideas. We pursue the free exchange of ideas. Explore the lessons of science, philosophy, and the creative arts. Science, philosophy, and the creative arts. I'm sure we could add to that list, but that's a fairly broad pool. Science, philosophy, the creative arts. What kind of world is this? A complicated one, an interesting one. We're actually experiencing an absolute explosion in what we would call scientific data. We can't even keep up with it. The scientists can't even keep it up with it. They actually have to create separate camps for themselves so they can keep their heads straight. And, this one's not quite done, undertake independent spiritual journeys. Even 500 years ago, that was hard to imagine that you had such freedom. People didn't wake up in the morning and think, well, after Mass, I think I'm going to go down the street and try the Buddhist temple. The world was not like that. We pursue the free exchange of ideas, explore the lessons of science, philosophy, and the creative arts, and undertake independent spiritual journeys. We strive to safeguard and extend human rights. We strive. You all know that almost everything you do has a moral dark side. Like the car you drove, like the lithium in this phone, and whoever put it together for that matter. We strive to safeguard and extend human rights. Peace and social justice, locally and globally. It's getting more difficult. As individuals and jointly with others. A lot of conjunctions in here. Now, when will you be done with that? We strive to safeguard and extend human rights, peace, and social justice locally and globally as individuals and jointly with others. We care for the earth. Here's the next one. We care for the earth. Not a terribly new idea. It's in a lot of ancient stories and myths that we are caretakers and the earth also takes care of us. We care for the earth. We care for the earth. Can I see that? I wrote it down wrong. We care for our earth home with mindfulness and responsibility for ourselves and future generations. Maybe at no other point in human history has this been more important. Hear it again. We care for our earth home with mindfulness and responsibility for ourselves and for future generations. Here's the last value. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, spirit, which, if we combine that with the lessons of science, we might say something like, there is no difference. Mind, body, spirit. Serotonin and transcendent existential experiences hold hands. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, spirit, recognizing our self-responsibility, interrelatedness, and interdependence. We promote wholeness and wellness of mind, body, spirit, recognizing our self-responsibility, interrelatedness, and interdependence. So what kind of world do you want to co-create? I think just getting together in this room from time to time and reminding ourselves we have values, we'd like to talk about them, we'd like to live into them, we'd like to challenge ourselves and our neighbors to do the same, and even to trust that most people, remember my 80-20 rule that I made up statistically a few weeks ago? 80% of the people are, 20% are the extremes and they get all the airtime, and 80%, trust me, 80%. I have too many percentages? Hey, I'm an English major. Okay, what can you say? 80, 10, and 10. All right. My point is, we've got extremes, and most people live in the middle. Most people you know, regardless of political position, share many of these values, might express them differently. There are points of interrelatedness that we have yet to explore. That's what I'd like to suggest. So what kind of world are we co-creating? And let me say one more thing. We live in apocalyptic times. I really mean that in the old sense of the word. Destruction and renewal. Apocalypse means to reveal. It reveals something. And that's the kind of age we live in. All the stuff that's happening, the fragmentation, disorientation, the economy, people groups, borders, science, diseases, fragmentation, apocalypse, collapse. The question is, what does it reveal? It also reveals the birth of something else. That's always the way the cycle goes. Death and renewal. Always. That's always been the pattern. That's the great pattern of evolution. That's the great pattern of growth, period. It's at the heart of most religions, like death and resurrection. Ever heard of that? It's the way things are. And yes, it is a dangerous and crazy and insane world right now. And also at the same time, there are seeds of life and possibility and newness and freshness all in the same cauldron, you could say, like a witch in the forest stirring things, you know, in that cauldron. What might come of it? So this morning I got up and I was looking at my notes and I was standing by the window and I saw an eagle. And what's interesting about this eagle family that lives in the same little stretch of land that I live in is that they had a nest, and I don't know if you've ever seen an eagle's nest, but they're not small. And you don't even know how old they are. They could be 50 years old, 100 years old. You don't know. And it blew down in the storm. And if you saw the size of, which is at least as large as this platform, the original eagle's nest, blew down in the storm. And what did the eagles do? They got together, they lamented, they tweeted about it, they complained, they said, talked about global climate change. They protested, they had these little signs, and they said, no more fossil fuels. No, what they did is they got back to work. And that eagle landed in the Black Walnut this morning, and I stood underneath it, and it sat there for a while, and then flew off and snatched a stick with its talons right off the black walnut and flew back to the nest, the brand new nest in a different tree. So there's something about the natural world, which we are, that is a great teacher right now. Things are bad, and you can also make a nest. At least it seems to me. So, with that said, I'm going to end my talk. And part 2 is going to be everything we'll do after this initial gathering, which we'll explain in a few minutes. So thanks for listening.